Okay, so we're back in the kitchen today addressing some of the issues, the gapping with this vinyl plank where the butt ends had split apart because of temperature change, and I'm messing around with some of this putty, and I'm going to show you guys whether or not I had any luck filling these gaps. Okay, so I did a review a couple months ago, and I told you guys that around this stove area while we were building this house, we had an electric heater running. That was our temporary heat during the build, and it ran into some of the colder months of the year. And the plank all around this area got extremely hot. It expanded and then it contracted once the house got to a regular resting temperature. And we've got some pretty bad gapping along this whole section here. So after that video, I got a lot of comments that some of you guys have used Roberts Putty to fill these gaps. Now I could go along and pull all these planks out, but it would mean that I would have to pull out this stove, pull off those kick plates to get underneath there. I'm gonna go ahead and try this putty and let's see what it does. I'm gonna back it up here so you can see that's much less noticeable. Here's a gap and you see it shows up dark next door. I gotta clean this up. I mean, that makes it a little less visible. All that down in there. Okay, now that's not too bad. Between the two, the brown's a little bit too dark, doesn't quite match. And the tan actually works pretty good. That was a pretty big gap. It's still visible that that is putty, but it does take away from the visual effect of just having the black line in there. So I think I'm gonna try a couple more of these with the tan right now and see how it goes. Now up close you can really notice that color difference, but when I hover over top, you can still tell that it's brown, but when I go to one right next door that's dark, I don't think that it shows up as bad. Now we don't have an exact color match, and because of the color variation in this, it's having a hard time matching up. But I think I'm gonna go ahead and keep filling the rest of these, and I do think that it's helping make these gaps less visible. Okay guys, so this is the really big gap. This is the worst one we've got by far. And I think I'm gonna have to try mixing these colors because neither of them's a good match and it's really gonna stand out with this big of a gap. So I'm gonna kind of do this in two parts and see how it goes. Okay, it's one day later. The sun is really shining in here good and bright on this floor. And after getting a second look at it and after talking it over with the wife, I think that we've had a bit of change of heart. And what I'm gonna say is that there is very select gaps that we would use this on again. And I think generally we're not that happy with how it turned out in most of them, just because it's too obvious that it's a solid filler. So I'm gonna show you one more time. Try not to block this with my shadow. One that looked good yesterday in the solid sun, and now that it's dry, it's kind of coming off with almost like a little orangey hue. And honestly, I think I'd prefer the gap at this point because it just stands out too much that we patch these couple and not the rest. So, final word guys, I think I'm gonna keep this in some of the very thin gaps and the gaps where the colors were very similar from plank to plank. But as soon as you have a difference where we're going from a dark plank to a lighter one, very noticeable. And the ones that it worked out on best were, for example, it's right, that's a gap that it was used on. I don't know if you can see, but these two planks are the same color plank. So it's very easy. They're both light and they're very close to the tan color, so it works. But on a lot of the other ones, for example, right here is the one that it's not gonna work well on. When it goes from dark to light, it's too obvious. So anyhow, that's it guys. Use this stuff very selectively, but it's definitely not the answer.